feeling so that if you don't participate, then you're getting one.
Spontaneity.
Oh, sorry.
Stand here. Excellent. So, I want you to stand. Actually, let's see. Stand right there. You stand here. Send it without touching. As close as possible without touching. You just watch what happens. Okay? Just so everyone can tell what's happening. The first person, we've got this window here. First person's hand is just barely over this window pane. Second person's hand is on the shoulder of the first. And our third person is watching what's going to happen. So, what's your name? I'm going to call you Robert. Andrew. The Alexander. You are our judge, Joe Brown. And then, Robert, why don't you give a little push to Alexander? You broke my window. Judge Joe Brown, who broke my window?
Both of them?
Both of them? Which both? These two? Anyone agree with Judge Joe Brown? Anyone disagree with Judge Joe Brown? Yes. Why?
You told them to do it.
I told them to do it. I told him to do it, but Alexander was the one who pushed it.
After you asked them, after you saw them up in that position.
Interesting. Interesting. What do you say, Judge Joe Brown?
I mean, he pushed him and he pushed the window, so technically he did it, but kind of too.
But what about my case? I was the one who told him to do it.
He still broke it.
So, remember on Friday, we talked about two different cases of cause. We talked about scientific cause and legal cause. Scientifically, who broke the window? Alexander did. Alexander was the one who pushed it, but Alexander was also caused by the robber here who pushed Alexander, who pushed the window, who caused it to break. Scientifically, that's the chain of causation. But legally, you're right. I was the one who instigated it legally. When you're thinking about causation, legal causation, and we only deal with legal causation here, you got to make sure you understand the distinction between scientific causation and legal causation. Any questions? Great. Round of, oh, sorry, we got a question there. Legally, I was the one who told them all, so legally we would all be liable. Scientifically, I'm not liable at all. Yes, he was the scientific cause, which caused him, which caused the window to break. Any other questions? No? Round of applause, please.
Such a bad person.
Society.
One more example. So I am a builder, and I've got a nice building here. Let's move this. Everywhere. So we've got a nice 3-story building here. 1, 2, 3 stories. So I just built this, I'm the builder. City council comes along and says, hey, your building is too tall for our taste. We're going to ask you to remove the top floor. Did the city council take my top floor away from me? They told me to take it down, and I had to take the expenses of finding the contractors to take down this window, to take down this floor, and throw it away and get rid of it, etc. Did the city council take my top floor? Or did I take it? Who took my top floor? It was there a minute ago. Now it's not there. Who took it? Yes?
Is there a law that says you can't have that top floor?
Well, I had it, and then the city council said that there is a law, and I followed that law. So who took it? You had your hand up? Legally, they took it. Anyone disagree? So today we're going to be talking about expropriations and regulatory takings. See this? Expropriation and regulatory takings. So an expropriation is when the government takes your property, but then gives you compensation for it. Earlier in the year, we talked about a situation where eminent domain. We've all heard of eminent domain. The government says we want to build a highway through here. Your house happens to be along the path where the government wants to build a highway. The government says, do you want to sell your house? You say no. They say, too bad. We're taking your house, but the rule is we'll give you market value for the house plus a little bit more as compensation. That's an expropriation. That's been a long recognized right of governments to expropriate for the public good if they compensate. What did we say was the problem with the public good? Yeah.
It's subjective.
It's totally subjective. Totally subjective. But the government just says this is in the public good. Anybody remember the Kilo case I mentioned in this class? Kilo was a lady, owned a house. City government came in and said, we want to take your house to build a fancy new mall or plaza sort of place, and it's going to have a cancer research center and all these other great things. You got to sell your house to this guy who wants to build on your property. Kilo didn't want to sell her house. So the government came and took it from her and said, you got to sell your house for these guys to build their mall. And then the case went all the way to the Supreme Court in the United States. And the Supreme Court ruled, well, it's in even though the city says it's in the public interest, really it's in the benefit of this small construction company. They're really going to be benefiting. But because the public interest will always benefit some people over others, we can't say that this isn't in the public interest. Just because someone else is benefiting, therefore the city had the right to take Ms. Kilo's land. That's expropriation. They take your land, but they give you some money in exchange, without your consent. Yes?
Is it always money that's compensated?
Typically, yes. I can't think of any cases where it wasn't. Yes?
If the government was to like take away land and if they say like for some reason the housing market in that area you can't find a new house and you had to move like cities, and they also like compensate you for like when you're like unemployed and you have to move somewhere else.
There's no hard and fast rule for how much they compensate you. The city appraises properties, so they give you that, whatever they appraise it, plus a little bit more. You can't challenge it. Yes?
In that case, would the government or the contractor who's building the mall have to compensate this?
The government. It's always the government who has to compensate.
But then does the contractor have to pay the government?
Nope. No, so the contractor buys the land from the government, yes. The contractor buys the land from the government, but then the government then pays off the owner. Yes,
Who determines the compensation?
the government,
So they can dictate what they see as the market value for their property?
yes. Any other questions? So that was expropriation. We also have regulatory takings. This is a bit controversial. A regulatory taking is when the government adds a new regulation which limits what you can do economically with your own property. They change the law which limits what you can do with your own property. And the controversy is whether people should be compensated for this. Currently, there is no compensation for regulatory takings. You thought that example I just made up, was that a fun, cute example? I made it up right now? Can you all read this? NYC woman ecstatic as judge orders 20 floors cut from an already built condo. Someone built a condo. They already had all the regulations and permits, etc. in place to build a condo to be so many stories. Some old folks said it's too tall. We don't like it. NYC has enough tall buildings. So the judge sided with the old folks and asked them to take it down, to deconstruct 20 stories. 20 stories. Can you see all the ages there? So this is New York City. Yes, sir.
I heard about this, and didn't they follow all the rules? So why would they have to take it down?
They did. They followed all the rules. The judge said, not good enough. Regulatory taking. No compensation for the builder. Regulatory taking. Here is another situation. So this is in Toronto. This was a hearing about housing policy in Toronto. These people showed up to say that there are too many houses in Toronto. We've had enough houses. We should regulate fewer houses. What do you notice about the hair color? These are the people who show up to city council meetings, who show up to public consultations. And let me tell you what a public consultation is. If you want to build something and there's some zoning permitting already, if you want to build something in excess of the zoning or in excess of other land use rules, you have to have a public consultation. That means everyone in the area can come in, and then you make your case for why you should have the rules changed in your favor. And then everybody else gets to say why it shouldn't be. These are the people who show up to Toronto public consultations and say why a condo shouldn't be as tall as it is, should be shorter, etc. Yes?
Going back to the last one, what makes it a regulatory takings if there was no regulation in place that said that they couldn't be that tall just because the judge said so?
There were plenty of regulations in the last one.
Yeah.
As the other person said, the company, the developer, they followed all of them.
Yeah.
But these old people showed up and said, it's not good enough. And the judge sided with the old people. So they added a new regulation. These are who vote in city elections. These are the people who show up. These are the people who the politicians have to appease in order to keep their jobs, because these are the voters. Yes?
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. What's wrong is the people who aren't showing up. Like, they're all just doing their civil duty and going to these things. If like a larger demographic isn't going, then that's not their problem.
That's not their problem at all. It's your problem.
Yeah.
But you're too busy. You got school, you got work, you got a dating life you got to keep up, appearances, parties. You think these guys are worried about appearances? Let me tell you a story about a public meeting I was in Toronto, the downtown core. There's a, you know Union Station as that is that bay in front. There's another old building that sort of looks like Union Station at Yonge in front. It used to be the old customs office. And that's owned by a private company. And they were trying to get a skyscraper built on top of it. It's been sitting empty for several decades. Nobody uses it. There's some government offices, but it's mostly empty. And they're saying, let's just build some offices and some condos on top of it. It'll be glass, it'll be high-tech, fancy, all this stuff. I went to that public meeting, see what it was like. These sorts of folks showed up, and they started complaining about the foot traffic, the vehicular traffic. One guy stood up and said, I have a condo in something called the L Tower. Are you guys familiar with the L Tower in the city of Toronto? It looks like an L. It's very strangely shaped. Before you understand that, you have to understand historical preservation, historical buildings. Historical preservation status is a kind of regulatory taking, where the city declares some kind of building as historically significant. And then when it's historically significant, you have to jump through extra hurdles if you want to change it at all. It's usually reserved for older buildings from 50s and earlier. Sometimes they have 60s and 70s now. I think I told you guys the history that the first Ancient Monuments Act to preserve historical structures was in England, and it was enacted in the 1870s during the height of the Industrial Revolution, when they were tearing everything down and building new things. But what it protected as the Ancient Monuments Act was truly ancient monuments. I'm talking Neolithic era monuments like Stonehenge. But it didn't protect 15th century pubs. But as it happened, those 15th century pubs are still up and running in London, even though they went through several hundred years of rapid change. In Canada and the United States, we don't have as many ancient monuments. So what we preserve are 1950s brutalist architecture. But this guy, at the developments for this building going up at Yonge in front, he said, I live in the L Tower, and the L Tower is very striking, it's very beautiful, but it was built in the late 2000s. He said, when this tower goes up, it's going to block the view of the L Tower from the west. And I believe that the L Tower is so beautiful, it will one day be a historical structure. So we have to protect it now, so in the future, it'll have this historical structure value. Condos aren't the only thing that's protected. Wetlands, greenery, the green belt. When they enacted the green belt, we all know what the green belt is in this environmental science classroom. right? And in case anyone doesn't, it's this vast stretch of area just outside of the GTA that's protected against any sort of new development. The argument is we need this greenery for the environmental reasons. But that was a new piece of regulation. There were already lots of farmland and other kinds of commercial and residential structures there that were built there. And now they can't sell their land for other commercial reasons. The rule was that if you exist already on the greenbelt, you can continue your existence. But if you change your title, they can't change what's already happened. So if you're a farm in the greenbelt, you can't sell your farm to be turned into subdivided townhomes. It has to remain a farm forever, or it has to be reverted back to nature. Were the farmers compensated for this inability, for this removal of their ability to sell their land? No. Should they have been? One question is, where does the money come from? If you compensate the farmers, the government's going to have to compensate them. The government doesn't have the money. They have to raise that money through taxes. You have to work harder to then compensate those farmers for their inability to sell their land. Questions? The Brubaker chapter for today's class says that in 1968, there were over 8,000 agencies just within Ontario that had the right to expropriate land. That was 1968. Among those include cancer research buildings, but also cemeteries, public schools, and lots of other things that make up 8,000 different agencies that can take your land without your permission, but they just give you some cash in exchange. And that was 1968. Who knows what it is now? It took an entire government inquiry to figure out that number. And as Brubaker puts it, the inquiry boasted that it was over 8,000 agencies that can take your property without your permission. Talked about zoning again. If you take away people's land and if you restrict the amounts of land that people can develop on, not only are you preventing, let's draw the supply and demand graph now. This is great. You got price, quantity, demand is downward sloping, supply is upward sloping. What would a restriction on the use of land look like? A regulatory taking, what would that affect? Would that affect, is that a price control? Is that a quantity control? Is that a supply control? Or is that a demand control? Who's got a guess? Yes. It affects supply, yes. How would it affect supply? So if this was the original quantity and price, the government comes in and says, you can't, there's too much land being developed for housing. We need less land to be developed for housing. They're putting a quantity cap. A quota, effectively, they're putting a quota. What's going to happen to the supply curve is that it's going to try to trace out this quota. That means, what will be the price now? What will be the price? Will it be higher or lower than the previous price? Who says lower? Who says higher? Exactly how much higher? Exactly how much higher? Yes?
Wouldn't it be the price at the given quota cap?
At
The price expected at the quota cap.
it's where the supply intersects with demand. But this is the supply. This is the price demanders are willing to pay, right? But if you notice, the supply curve is inelastic down here. That means suppliers would be just as willing to sell at this low price than they are at this high price. Suppliers are just as willing to sell at this low price than they are at this high price. Why do they sell at the high price? How do they get away with selling at the high price? Yes?
Demand. High demand.
The demand. The demand is so anxious for any housing that they'll pay higher prices. When you limit the amount of land for use, you have to increase prices. Yes?
On the subject of zoning, I think one could also make an argument that it exists to protect riparian rights in a sense, because at a lot of these public meetings, other arguments that get brought up are that, I mean, especially in Toronto, that the infrastructure can't support, the Toronto's infrastructure can't support an increase, the increasing population that a condo building would provoke. So if you live in that area and then suddenly the infrastructure that's in place can't support the demands of the increased population, then I think that's one justification for zoning.
So the question was, isn't there another justification for zoning in that it prevents overconsumption, effectively, of shared resources? For example, transit. You build a condo on top of a subway station, and then if the subway station is already at capacity, and then you build a condo for 2,000 other residents, they all come down, it's going to be even more crowded than it already is. That is an argument people bring up at these public meetings for zoning, denying zoning changes. The issue is that it still doesn't affect the property rights of the person building. So you can say you have I guess the punchline is this: it shouldn't be the property owner's problem that if the common pool resources are overcrowded, the people moving into that building, they should be aware enough to know that if this is already the most crowded station in the country, in the city, then if they just move in there, they're just going to be more crowded. That'll reduce the demand for living in that building. Does that make sense? If you see, well, let's see what's somewhere really crowded. Bloor Station during rush hour. How many people just hang out at Bloor Station during rush hour, just standing still when you guys have to know Bloor Station during rush hour? Thousands of people are moving in and out per second. Per second. It is madness. And people get pretty aggressive, especially during rush hour, pushing and shoving. And it's not a nice place to be. So you're only there if you have to be there. And if you're building a tower in a city that's already constrained, on top of a metro station that's already busy, the solution isn't to limit the number of people moving in. The solution is to build more capacity on the metro station. But that is an argument people use, that we're already at capacity, we can't fit in more people. If you want more people, then you have to fit in, you have to increase your capacity. But developers can't increase capacity because the capacity belongs to the city. Developers can't control the subways. Does that make sense? Any other questions? So this is the situation with zoning. Let's talk about this now with this story. How about the 20 stories that were removed? Let's redraw this. We got price, we got quantity. Downward sloping demand, D for downward sloping. What's going to be the supply? What does the supply look like for one condo tower? What's the supply curve going to look like for a single condo tower? Yes. It's going to be a vertical line. It's going to get this price. So now, a judge comes in and says, you got to lop off 20 stories of your building. What's going to happen to the supply and demand curve? What's going to shift, demand or supply? Supply, which direction? Inside or outside? Left. Anyone say right? Good. It's going to move in. It's going to be our new quantity. It's going to be our new price. Any questions about this? Is there anything limiting how far governments can go in expropriating land and taking via regulation? Is there a natural limit, or can they just take everything? Yes?
Public opinion? Public opinion?
Public opinion. Public opinion. Governments only survive based on public opinion. All governments everywhere are, in a sense, popular governments, because the governing few is always vastly outnumbered by the many. So in a sense, all these takings, all these rules happen because you are consenting to them. Or at least that's how you're acting. If you really didn't consent, you would show up to these meetings, but you don't. So how else are we supposed to judge your opinion? You don't care, right? So you're okay with governments just taking 20 stories off a building. Otherwise, you would have said something about it. Yeah.
What about somewhere like North Korea, where if you bring up your opinion, you'll get executed? Or
What if, so the population of North Korea is multi-million, right? I think 10, 20 million, maybe more. How many people are in the governments of North Korea? A few 100,000? They have guns. But how many, with the gun, you only have so many magazines you can fit into one gun. They can't kill everyone.
But it becomes a matter of like valuing your life over.
Yeah. Individually, it doesn't happen. But sometimes, for example, the United States in 1776, enough of them got together with their own guns that they overthrew the most powerful empire in the world at that time. Lots of other popular uprisings. Iran, 1979. The Shah of Iran was a brutal dictator. He had all the guns, he had all the secret police, all the torture chambers, etc. And then millions of people poured onto the street, and he said, Shah, go home. And then he went to Egypt. And then the mullahs came in from France. And then everyone was like, how did this happen? And then that's just how the mullahs have been running the country for the last 50 years. They just showed up from France. Everyone's like, this was strange, but it happened. Who's heard of the Laffer curve? The Laffer curve. You've heard of it? No? Okay. So let me ask you this. This is going to be the tax rate from 0 to 100%. This is going to be tax revenues from 0 to a lot. If the tax rate is 0%, how much tax revenue is the government going to raise? Tax rate is 0, so they're going to raise 0. So we put a dot there. Now here's another question. If the tax rate is 100%, how much is the government going to earn in tax revenue? They'll earn 100%?
Nothing.
If you had to work, well, you didn't have to work, but if you had the choice to work, but every dime that you earned, you had to pay to the government, would you work? No. The tax rate, the tax revenue at a 100% tax rate is also 0. That means we know that there's some tax rates where you make positive revenue. That means generally it looks like this. What does this mean? That means that if you want to raise this much revenue, you can either have a low tax rate or a high tax rate. Tax high, tax low. And then there's a optimal tax rate, which gives you the maximum revenue. Every country is different. Most estimates of this curve show there are actually multiple local maximums. You guys know what I mean when I say that? That means the real curve probably looks something closer to this. Tax rates. And look, this is 100, 0. It looks something like this. Probably the real one looks something like that. Going back to this guy though, just the general case, that means if you're here, or if you're here, sorry, if you lower taxes, you can get more revenue. And down there, if you raise taxes, you can get more revenue. All right. See you guys Friday.
Question.
Yeah. So could getting